History is filled with rulers who weren't just cruel, they were downright insane. You've heard of Caligula, but what if I told you there were rulers even more twisted? From emperors who drank their enemies' blood to kings who turned their palaces into slaughterhouses, these leaders took tyranny to a whole new level. Stick around, because number 1 will make even Caligula look sane. Let's start with number 10. Some rulers are born mad, some go mad with power, and then there's Sultan Ibrahim I, a man so unhinged he nearly destroyed the mighty Ottoman Empire in just 8 years. He drowned his entire harem, covered his palace in furs, and spent more time indulging in twisted fantasies than ruling his people. This is the story of one of the most deranged sultans in history. Ibrahim wasn't raised like a normal prince. He spent his entire childhood locked away in a dark, lonely room known as the cafes, the Ottoman prince's cage. This was a twisted Ottoman tradition. To prevent civil war, Ottoman princes were either killed or locked away, so they couldn't challenge the ruling sultan. Ibrahim lived in total isolation for 23 years. No visitors, no friends, no sunlight, just paranoia and silence. Then one day, his life changed forever. The Sultan, his older brother, had been murdered. And now, Ibrahim was the new ruler. At first, Ibrahim refused to leave his cage. He thought it was all a trick, that someone wanted him dead. It took his mother, Qasem Sultan, one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, to drag him out and place the crown on his head. But the years of isolation had already shattered his mind. Once the reality of his power set in, Ibrahim lost all control. Ibrahim developed a strange obsession. He covered his palace, his clothes, even his bed in the softest furs he could find. He demanded exotic, rare animal pelts be brought from across the empire: cheetah, mink, fox, even ermine. But that was just the beginning. Ibrahim was obsessed with women, but not just any women. He sent spies across the empire to find the largest woman alive. When they finally found a colossal woman, he immediately made her his favorite concubine. But his appetites didn't stop there. Ibrahim's paranoia kept growing. He started believing his concubines were plotting against him, that they were sleeping with other men behind his back. So, in a fit of insanity, he ordered his entire harem executed. 280 women, some of the most beautiful in the empire, were tied up, dragged to the Bosporus Strait, and thrown into the sea. The once lively halls of the harem fell silent, and Ibrahim, he simply went back to his furs. While Ibrahim drowned himself in pleasure and paranoia, the empire fell apart. He raised taxes to unbearable levels, spending fortunes on his lavish lifestyle. The once mighty Ottoman army was left underfunded, weak and broken. The empire that had once conquered lands from Europe to Arabia was now crumbling under the weight of one man's madness. And finally, his people had enough. By 1648, Ibrahim's reign had become too dangerous to continue. His own mother, Qasem Sultan, had him overthrown. For the first time in 8 years, the man who had indulged in every twisted fantasy was now a prisoner. And just 10 days later, Ibrahim was strangled to death. The mad sultan was gone, remembered as one of the worst rulers in Ottoman history, a man raised in darkness, given absolute power, and destroyed by his own insatiable desires. Next at number 9 is Nero, Rome's mad emperor.
My dream will become reality.
He called himself a god, a visionary, a lover of the arts, but to Rome, he was a monster. Nero wasn't born into power. He was placed there by his mother. Agrippina the Younger, one of Rome's most ruthless and ambitious women, had one goal: to rule through her son. She poisoned, plotted, and murdered anyone who stood in her way, clearing the path for Nero to take the throne at just 16 years old. At first, Nero was a puppet. Rome hoped he would be a fair ruler. But power changes people, and soon Nero wasn't taking orders anymore. Agrippina had created a monster. And now that monster wanted her gone. Nero's own mother had become a threat. And he had a plan. He invited her onto a special boat, designed to collapse and drown her. But Agrippina swam to shore. Realizing his plan had failed, Nero sent soldiers to finish the job. They stabbed her to death in her own home. And when they reported back to Nero, do you know what he said? "Now I am truly emperor." Then came the fire. In 64 AD, a fire broke out in Rome. For 6 days, it devoured the city. Homes, temples, entire districts reduced to ash. But here's where things get twisted. Some say Nero started it himself. Why? To clear space for his golden palace. As Rome burned, witnesses claimed Nero stood on a balcony, playing his lyre and singing. Did he really? Or was it just a rumor? We may never know. But what we do know is that Nero needed a scapegoat. So he blamed the Christians. Thousands were tortured and executed in the most grotesque ways imaginable. For Nero, cruelty wasn't just punishment, it was entertainment. He tied prisoners to stakes, covered them in oil, and set them on fire, turning them into human torches to light his garden parties. He fed people to wild animals, forced gladiators into impossible fights, and enjoyed every second of it. This wasn't just ruling, this was madness. But even Rome had limits. By 68 AD, the people had had enough. The army revolted, the Senate turned against him, and when Nero finally realized his time was up, he ran. He hid in a villa, but the soldiers were coming. So he grabbed a dagger and turned to his servant. "Kill me," he whispered. "I can't do it myself." But no one moved, so with one final scream, Nero plunged the dagger into his throat. His last words, "What an artist dies in me." Next is number 8. Some rulers protect their people, some expand their kingdoms. And then there's Queen Ranavalona I, a woman who turned Madagascar into a kingdom of terror. She defied European powers, crushed her enemies, and ruled with an iron fist. Her own people feared her more than any foreign invader. In 1828, King Ranavalona I of Madagascar died suddenly, and his widow, Ranavalona, wasted no time securing her place on the throne. Normally, the king's heir should have taken power, but Ranavalona had a different plan. She wiped out the rightful heirs, executed nobles who opposed her, and took the crown for herself. With the stroke of a sword, she became the most powerful person in Madagascar. But power wasn't enough. She wanted absolute control. From the moment she took the throne, Ranavalona ruled with terror. She despised foreigners, distrusted Christian missionaries, and had zero tolerance for opposition. Her solution: torture, mass executions, and the most brutal punishments imaginable. One of her most feared methods was the Tangina trial. Suspected traitors were forced to drink a deadly poison. If they vomited and survived, they were innocent. If they died in agony, they were guilty. Tens of thousands perished under this system, many of them completely innocent. Europe was watching Madagascar, hungry for its resources and eager to spread Christianity. But Queen Ranavalona wanted none of it. She expelled European missionaries, banned Christianity, and executed converts. Some were beheaded. Others were thrown off cliffs. Missionaries who had once thrived in Madagascar fled in terror, warning the world of the ruthless queen. The French and British weren't happy. They sent ships and soldiers to challenge Ranavalona's rule. But what they didn't expect, she fought back and won. Using guerrilla tactics, traps, and sheer brutality, she crushed multiple invasions. At a time when European empires devoured entire nations, Ranavalona stood her ground. Mad? Maybe. But she was one of the few rulers who successfully resisted colonization. But while she kept foreigners out, her people suffered. Her brutal wars, purges, and paranoia led to famine and mass starvation. By the end of her reign, Madagascar's population had dropped by half. That's right, half. After 33 years of terror, in 1861, Queen Ranavalona finally died. There was no grand battle, no violent coup. She simply passed away in her sleep, one of history's most brutal rulers, gone in an instant. As soon as she was gone, her son reversed many of her policies, welcoming back foreign trade and Christianity. Next, number 7, is Qin Shi Huang, the man who forged an empire with an iron fist, sought immortality, and died in one of the most ironic ways imaginable. Born as Ying Zheng in 259 BCE, he became king of Qin at just 13 years old. His father had died suspiciously early, leaving the throne to a boy not yet ready to rule. But behind the scenes, someone else pulled the strings: his mother, Queen Zhaoji. Rumors spread that Lu Buwei was not just a powerful minister, but also Ying Zheng's real father. By 22, he seized full control, and the first thing he did, executed anyone who questioned his bloodline, including his own mother's lovers. For centuries, China was divided into warring kingdoms, but King Zheng had one mission: unite them all, no matter the cost. He waged ruthless wars, using brutal tactics to conquer state after state. By 221 BCE, he had done the impossible. For the first time in history, China was one empire under one ruler. He renamed himself Qin Shi Huang, meaning First Emperor of Qin. But his rule was just beginning, and the people would soon wish they had never been unified. Qin Shi Huang didn't just want to rule China. He wanted to control everything. His first act? Destroying knowledge. He ordered thousands of books burned, wiping out centuries of history and philosophy. Confucian scholars who opposed him buried alive. Over 400 of them were reportedly executed, their bodies tossed into mass graves. To him, knowledge that questioned his rule was a threat, and threats had to be destroyed. One of his greatest legacies? The early version of the Great Wall of China, but the cost? Hundreds of thousands of lives. Peasants, prisoners, and even soldiers were forced into backbreaking labor. Many died from exhaustion. Others were worked to death, their bodies buried inside the wall itself. The Great Wall wasn't just a defense against invaders. It was a mass grave. For a man so powerful, Qin Shi Huang feared only one thing: death. He became obsessed with living forever. He sent expeditions to find the mythical elixir of life. He ordered his alchemists to create pills of immortality, and, ironically, these pills were made of mercury. By 210 BCE, the poison had slowly destroyed his body. The man who unified China had been killed by his own paranoia. Even in death, Qin Shi Huang's ego knew no bounds. He ordered the construction of one of the greatest tombs in history, the Terracotta Army, over 8,000 life-size soldiers, horses, and chariots, all designed to protect him in the afterlife. His tomb was filled with rivers of liquid mercury, deadly traps, and secrets lost to time. Even today, his actual burial chamber remains sealed because the levels of mercury inside are dangerously high. Qin Shi Huang's legacy is complicated. He unified China, but at a terrible cost. He built the Great Wall, but at the expense of countless lives. He sought immortality, only to be killed by his own elixir. Next, coming in at number 6 is Jean Bedel Bokassa, the African dictator who dreamed of being Napoleon, fed his enemies to lions, and allegedly had an appetite for human flesh. Born in 1921 in French Equatorial Africa, Bokassa's childhood was filled with tragedy. When he was 6, French colonial officials executed his father, leaving him orphaned. Seeking revenge and power, he joined the French army and fought in World War II, Indochina, and Algeria. By the 1960s, his home country, the Central African Republic, had gained independence. Its first president, David Dacko, trusted Bokassa, making him head of the army. But Bokassa didn't just want a high rank, he wanted it all. In 1966, Bokassa overthrew his own cousin, seized power, and declared himself president for life. But being president wasn't enough. He wanted to be an emperor. In 1977, Bokassa did the unthinkable. He abolished the Central African Republic and turned it into the Central African Empire. The coronation? A $20 million spectacle, funded almost entirely by France. Bokassa dressed like Napoleon, rode in a golden carriage, and placed a diamond-studded crown on his own head. Meanwhile, his people lived in poverty, starving as he spent millions on jewels and palaces. But this was only the beginning of the madness. Bokassa ruled with an iron fist and a twisted mind. He tortured his enemies himself, sometimes feeding them to his lions and crocodiles. He forced school children to wear expensive uniforms with his face on them. When they protested, he had them rounded up and murdered. Some reports say he beat them to death with his own cane. But the most horrifying rumors were yet to come. In 1986, shocking reports surfaced. Bokassa hadn't just killed his enemies, he had eaten them. A former palace chef testified that Bokassa had a freezer full of human remains, which he occasionally served at state dinners. Even foreign dignitaries may have unknowingly eaten human flesh at his banquets. To this day, the full truth remains unknown. But one thing was certain, Bokassa's reign of horror was coming to an end. At first, France supported Bokassa. They had helped fund his rise to power. But when the reports of massacres and cannibalism surfaced, they had to act. In 1979, while Bokassa was away in Libya, French paratroopers invaded the capital and overthrew him. Bokassa fled to France, living in luxury exile for several years. But in 1986, he returned to the Central African Republic, thinking he would be welcomed as a hero. Instead, he was arrested immediately. Bokassa was sentenced to death, but later his sentence was reduced to life in prison. In a bizarre twist, he was released in 1993. He spent his final years claiming he was the 13th apostle of Jesus Christ. In 1996, he died of a heart attack, leaving behind a legacy of terror, madness, and dark rumors. Today, Bokassa is remembered as one of history's most twisted rulers, a man who crowned himself emperor, tortured his people, and may have dined on human flesh. At number 5 is Pol Pot, the butcher of Cambodia. The twisted ruler wanted to erase the past and build a new world from the ashes. His dream, a utopia. The reality, a nightmare. Under his rule, Cambodia became a graveyard. Over 2 million dead, killed by disease, starvation, and murder. Pol Pot wasn't always a killer. Born Saloth Sar, he was once a quiet, unremarkable student who studied in Paris. There, he became obsessed with Marxism, the idea of a classless society where everyone was equal. And when he returned to Cambodia, he decided to force that dream into reality, no matter how many had to die. He formed the Khmer Rouge, a brutal communist movement that believed the past must be erased. And in 1975, after years of war, they won, but the people had no idea what was coming. April 17, 1975, Cambodia was reborn. Pol Pot declared Year Zero, the start of a new society. And the first step, destroy everything old. Doctors, useless. Teachers, corrupt. Business owners, traitors. Within days, entire cities were emptied. Over 2 million people were forced into the countryside to become farmers. No money, no religion, no schools, no hospitals, just work or die. But forced labor wasn't enough. Pol Pot wanted to purge Cambodia of anyone who could resist, so his soldiers began the slaughter. If you were educated, you died. If you spoke a foreign language, you died. If you wore glasses, you died. Yes, glasses. To Pol Pot, intelligence was dangerous. People were tortured into confessing crimes they never committed. Then they were taken to the killing fields, but bullets, too expensive. So they used hammers, axes, bamboo sticks, even machetes. Some victims were beaten to death, others buried alive. And the worst part, children weren't spared. Pol Pot believed, to kill the weeds, you must pull out the roots. So babies were smashed against trees, their skulls cracked open. The Khmer Rouge wanted an agricultural paradise, but they had no idea how to farm. They forced people to grow insane amounts of rice, but took all of it for themselves. Millions starved. Meanwhile, Pol Pot, he lived in luxury, surrounded by food, servants, and wealth. And when people tried to escape, they were shot on sight. By 1978, the world had seen enough. After years of chaos, Cambodia's neighbor, Vietnam, invaded, overthrowing Pol Pot. His own men turned on him, and the Khmer Rouge collapsed. But did Pol Pot face justice? No. He escaped into the mountains, hiding for 20 years. And in 1998, the butcher of Cambodia died in his sleep. No trial, no execution, no justice. Today, Cambodia still bears the scars of Pol Pot's madness. A nation built on blood and lies, a genocide the world barely remembers. And one question remains: how did the world let it happen? At number 4 is Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, Russia's Mad Tsar. He wasn't just brutal, he was paranoid, ruthless, and completely out of control. He started as a visionary, but ended as a mad butcher. Ivan's story begins with death and betrayal. At just 3 years old, he became Grand Prince of Moscow. But in a world of power-hungry nobles, a child was just a pawn. His mother was poisoned when he was only 8, leaving him alone in a court filled with scheming boyars, Russian nobles. Instead of protecting him, they abused him, starved him, and treated him like a prisoner in his own palace. He spent his childhood watching, learning, and waiting. By 16, he had one goal: revenge. In 1547, Ivan made history. He crowned himself the first Tsar of Russia. Tsar, a title derived from Caesar. Ivan didn't just want to rule Russia, he wanted to build an empire. And at first he did. He reformed laws, strengthened the army, expanded Russian territory, and even promoted trade. For a moment, it seemed like he would be remembered as Ivan the Great. But power is a dangerous thing, and Ivan's paranoia was about to turn him into something else. The one person who kept Ivan sane was his wife, Anastasia Romanova. She was his rock, his advisor, his only true friend. And then, she died, poisoned, just like his mother. Something inside him snapped. Ivan became obsessed with the idea that his enemies were everywhere, and he was going to make them pay. Ivan created the Oprichnina, his personal death squad, dressed in black robes, riding black horses, and carrying severed dog heads. They had one job: terrorize anyone Ivan suspected of treason. They slaughtered entire towns, women, children, priests. No one was safe. And in 1570, Ivan ordered his greatest atrocity. Paranoia drove Ivan to believe the wealthy city of Novgorod was plotting against him. So he burned it to the ground. Men were boiled alive. Women and children were tied together and drowned in frozen rivers. In just 5 weeks, 60,000 people were dead. Ivan had gone from paranoid ruler to bloodthirsty madman. But the worst was yet to come. In 1581, Ivan got into a furious argument with his own son. No one knows what was said that night, but what we do know is that Ivan, blinded by rage, grabbed his iron staff and smashed his son's skull open. His only heir, the future of Russia, was dead. And in that moment, Ivan the Terrible finally realized he was the monster he always feared. By 1584, Ivan was a shadow of himself. His paranoia had destroyed everything. One night, while playing chess, he suddenly collapsed. Some say it was a stroke. Others say he was poisoned. But in the end, Ivan died as he lived, in the grip of fear, surrounded by enemies. At number 3 is Vlad the Impaler, the real-life Dracula, a name that didn't just kill his enemies, but turned them into human scarecrows. Born in 1431, Vlad III was raised in bloodshed. His father, Vlad II Dracul, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a secret knightly order sworn to defend Christianity, but loyalty meant nothing in this brutal world. When Vlad was still a boy, his father made a desperate deal with the Ottoman Empire, handing Vlad and his younger brother Radu over as hostages. Vlad was beaten, tortured, and forced to study the ways of his enemy, but instead of breaking him, it made him a monster. Vlad returned home to Wallachia and took the throne, but not through diplomacy. He took it with steel and terror. His favorite punishment? Impalement. He didn't just kill his enemies, he turned them into horrific works of art. His soldiers would drive massive wooden stakes through their victims' bodies, carefully avoiding major organs, to keep them alive for days. That was Vlad's message: defy me, and you'll suffer worse than death. And get this, Vlad didn't just order these executions. He watched them like entertainment. One legend claims he would dip his bread into the blood of his victims as he ate. True or not, the people of the time believed it, and that's what made him so terrifying. In 1462, the Ottoman Empire sent an army of over 90,000 men to crush Vlad once and for all. But as they entered his lands, they found something out of a nightmare. An entire forest filled with 20,000 rotting corpses, all impaled on stakes. The stench of death was so overwhelming that even the battle-hardened Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, one of the most feared warriors of the time, turned back. Vlad had single-handedly stopped one of the greatest empires in history with sheer terror. Here's the twist. While the West sees Vlad as a bloodthirsty madman, in Romania, he's still a hero. Why? Because despite his cruelty, he protected his land from invaders. He crushed corruption, made his people fear only him, and kept law and order through pure terror. Even today, Romanians tell stories of how a golden goblet sat unguarded in a town square because no one dared steal under Vlad's rule. But like all tyrants, his reign ended in betrayal. In 1476, after years of war, Vlad was ambushed and beheaded. Some say his body was buried in a monastery. Others claim his head was sent to the Sultan as proof of his death. But the legend of Vlad Dracula never died. His name lives on, not just as a historical ruler, but as a nightmare that still haunts the world. Vlad the Impaler, the real Dracula. At number 2 is a king who turned an entire country into a nightmare. The Butcher of the Congo, Leopold II of Belgium. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a conqueror, a businessman, and one of history's greatest mass murderers. Under his rule, millions of people died, all for profit. Leopold II became King of Belgium in 1865, but there was one problem. Belgium was small, and Leopold, he wanted more. He looked at Africa, where European empires were grabbing land, and saw an opportunity. But he knew one thing: Belgium wouldn't support a brutal invasion. So he came up with a brilliant, twisted lie. Leopold told the world he was going to help Africa. He claimed he wanted to bring civilization to the savage lands, spread Christianity, and end the slave trade. And people believed him. In 1885, the world handed him the Congo Free State, an area 76 times bigger than Belgium. But there was nothing free about it. The truth? Leopold turned the Congo into his personal slave state. He wanted one thing: rubber. The world was in a rubber boom, and Leopold realized he could make millions. And so he forced the people of the Congo to harvest it, or face unimaginable punishment. If a village didn't meet their rubber quota, they cut off hands. Not just the men, women, children, even babies. They didn't just kill people, they mutilated them. Leopold's reign of terror lasted over 20 years. His soldiers, the Force Publique, killed, tortured, and enslaved millions. Some were whipped to death with the shikot, a whip made of dried hippo hide that tore flesh from bone. Others starved, as Leopold stole every resource the land had. By the time it was over, at least 10 million people were dead. But back in Europe, Leopold hid the truth. He built glorious monuments, funded charities, and paid off journalists to write glowing stories about him. He called himself a philanthropist, a humanitarian. Meanwhile, millions screamed in the shadows. But one man uncovered the truth: Edmond Dean Morel. He noticed something strange. Belgium was shipping tons of rubber and ivory out of the Congo, but no trade goods were going in, just guns and chains. He exposed Leopold's horrors to the world, and suddenly, the great humanitarian looked like a blood-soaked tyrant. Under massive international pressure, Belgium was forced to take the Congo away from Leopold. But was he punished? No, he kept his millions. He lived in luxury until his dying breath. Even today, his statues still stand in Belgium. Leopold never set foot in the Congo. He never held a sword. He never fired a gun. Yet he killed more people than Hitler and nearly wiped an entire country off the map. And the world has almost forgotten. Finally, at number 1 is the warlord who carved his empire from the corpses of his enemies, erased entire nations from history, and left a body count that makes modern wars look small. Genghis Khan, the first Khan of the Mongol Empire. Born as Temujin in 1162, his life began not in a palace, but in chains. His father, poisoned by rival tribes, left him a boy without protection, without an army. His own people abandoned him. His enemies enslaved him. But Temujin did not break. He learned. He plotted. He waited. And when the time came, he returned, not as a slave, but as a conqueror. Temujin didn't just build an army. He built a war machine. His horsemen could ride for days, sleep in the saddle, and fire arrows with deadly precision while galloping at full speed. They struck fast, struck hard, and never left survivors. By 1206, he had unified the Mongol tribes, taking the name that would send shivers down the spines of kings. Genghis Khan, universal ruler. And now, the world was his to take. Genghis Khan's conquests were not battles, they were exterminations. Entire cities were wiped off the map. At Nishapur, after his favorite general was killed, he ordered every living thing to be slaughtered. Men, women, children, even the dogs and cats. The death toll? Over 1.7 million. In one campaign alone, he killed an estimated 40 million people, 10% of the world's population at the time. Genghis Khan didn't just use swords, he used fear itself as a weapon. Before attacking a city, he he would send refugees ahead, letting them spread horror stories of the Mongols. Most cities surrendered without a fight, terrified of what he might do. Those that resisted, no one was left alive. To defy Genghis Khan was to choose extinction. For a man who destroyed millions, his own death remains a mystery. Some say he fell from his horse. Others say he was killed by a captive princess. But his biggest secret? His final resting place. His tomb was hidden, his burial party killed to keep it secret. Even today, the location of his grave remains unknown. Genghis Khan left behind a legacy of blood and empire. He reshaped Asia and Europe, toppled dynasties, and created a Mongol empire bigger than Rome and Alexander's combined. But he also left behind another surprising legacy. 1 in 200 men today carry his DNA. Was he a military genius or the greatest mass murderer in history? So, what did you think of our list? Did any of these rulers surprise you? Or do you think we missed someone even more twisted? Let us know in the comments. History is full of dark and shocking stories, and we're just scratching the surface. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insane tales from the past. Until next time, stay curious, and be glad these rulers are long gone.